This is Dr. Rodriguez going over Chapter 1, Part C for Psych 101. We have gone over the history of psychology. We went over the different theories that developed from structuralism, functionalism, psychoanalytic that later turned into psychodynamic, and there was behaviorism in there, and cognitive theory and humanistic. So those theories, like psychodynamic and humanistic and behaviorism and cognitive perspectives, all these different theories or perspectives are still used in psychology today, but we talk about them more as like subdivisions or different specializations within the field of psychology. And what's important to know is that no one theory or no one subdivision or specialization tells the whole story about human behavior. We need to consider the biological, how our nervous system and our endocrine system impact our behavior. We need to think about how our thinking affects our behavior and how we develop and how we're having other people around us affects our behavior. So there are a lot of different theories and also specializations or subdivisions within modern psychology today. Biopsychology focuses on the biology, our nervous system, having to do with our physical, more like a medical doctor kind of thing, looking at neuroscience and how what's going on in our body translates to outward behavior and thought, inward thought. Evolutionary theory says that behavior is about survival. So a cognitive psychologist is a psychologist who tends to focus more on the thinking aspects of psychology. A developmental psychologist looks at how we change and how we stay the same throughout our lives. Personality psychologist looks at how we're unique. Social psychologist looks at how we interact with others. How bias works and racism, and industrial organizational psychologists look at business practices. Health and clinical or counseling psychologists look at helping people to become healthier. So clinical counseling psychologists, I think, are what people think about when you hear the term psychologist. People often jump to, oh, you're gonna start, psychoanalyzing me and start diagnosing me. That is one tiny aspect of the field of psychology, and that's clinical or counseling psychology, where you're diagnosing disorders and treating them. That's just one aspect. That's the practical or applied part of psychology, where there's many other parts or many other theories or subdivisions or specializations within the field of psychology that a psychologist might be very interested in work in. So modern psychology it's a science, right? It's a social science. It's about research, but it's also about the practice. Kind of how I was just talking about how the clinical or the counseling is more about the practice, the applied stuff. The APA is the American Psychological Association. And what that is a professional organization of psychologists who are interested in advancing and disseminating psychology knowledge for the betterment of people. The APA publishes different academic journals and has conferences on different psychological concepts. You might have heard of APA citations or formatting, which we will use in psychology for, and I'll talk about it more when we do our research project. Those rules of how to write psychological papers or social papers in the social sciences comes from the APA. All right, so psychology is a science. It's about research, but it's also about practice, counseling. The different psychologists might work in different specializations. They can work at universities and the government. in different fields. Now, when you hear of a psychologist and they might have different, you might hear of different degrees, like having a PhD in psychology is a person who has a doctorate of philosophy in psychology. They got their, so they had got their associates maybe, or they definitely got their, bachelor's, then their master's, then their doctorate in psychology. And they spent a good portion of their studies learning about how to research psychology, do research in psychology, and then carrying out some research. They can later become professors or clinical or counseling psychologists, maybe work for the government in different businesses. Now, a PsyD is a person who has a doctorate in psychology, so similar to a PhD in psychology, but a PsyD is less research focused and more application in the clinical setting. So they probably spent more of their education learning about the counseling aspect of psychology, but also learning about these different other subdivisions or these other specializations. But they spent took more courses having to do with the counseling or the clinical aspects of psychology, and then also probably having an internship doing counseling. So both a PhD and a PsyD in psychology, they can study psychology, they can diagnose people and give tests, psychological tests, read those tests, and then they can also treat them if they go on to get licensed. But they cannot give medication. They cannot prescribe medications in most states. To be able to prescribe a medication, you have to be a psychiatrist. All right, a psychiatrist is a medical doctor, and they can prescribe medications like maybe anxiety medication or antipsychotic medication. So they can also treat and do talk therapy or counseling, but often there will be medications being prescribed. Now, a social worker or mental health counselor, they can do counseling and clinical work, but they tend to have a master's degree, and they tend to focus on problems with their clients that are more about daily life stresses rather than dealing with serious psychological diagnoses. All right, you're somebody who has maybe bipolar or schizophrenia, they're going to be dealing with more PhD, PsyD psychiatrists compared to social workers and mental health counselors. So up here, these are people that have doctorates. This psychiatrist has a doctorate in the medical field, then continues on and gets more education in psychology and social work. Mental health counselors, they focus their master's degree focused on learning how to help people deal with social problems, daily problems. And then these other graphs just show different behavioral health and other related providers. So when you think of a counselor or a mental health professional, they can be broken up into many different ways. Counselors, social workers, it kind of just depends on what their degree is. Psychiatrists, psychologists. And then over here, it just shows the different places where people who have doctorates in psychology can work.